This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, medical, or mental health advice. We speak from our personal experiences and opinions. The views expressed are solely those of the individual speaker and are not intended to malign any group, club, organization, or business.
Hey everyone, welcome to Confronting the Line, where we explore the often blurry line between transformation and exploitation, between what's helpful and what's harmful in the personal development and wellness industry. And I'm super excited today to have with me, so Tony, producers here with us also may chime in from time to time, but also Brandon Hurst. So Brandon is a former staff member for Landmark Worldwide, the company that we both worked for. And I actually met Brandon post my book. So I'm going to learn a bunch about Brandon today too, right along with everybody as he shares his story with us. So Brandon, I'm really grateful for you to come on today and share. So I think we should start, well, anything you want to say by way of hello or introduction. We're going to get to know you in the next hour or so, but
Yeah, you'll get to know me. Hi, I'm Brandon. Yeah, I worked there and now I'm not working there.
and you're on the West Coast.
Yeah, I'm
So
from Los Angeles, I'm still living here, born and raised.
wow, nice. Well, so why don't we start a little bit with your Landmark history? And it's so funny because like if we were going to run into each other in a party, so this is one of the things for our guests out there that have not participated in Landmark or a similar group. There's other groups like it, Lifespring Context and so on. But the first thing you do when you meet somebody is in this circle is you tell them your Landmark story, like your basic cred, right? So why don't we start there?
Sure. So, I was introduced to the Landmark programs by my mother when I was 13. My mom did the programs when she was 15. And so she also, had been in the work for a long time. But yeah, so I did the Landmark Forum. She had done the EST training when she was 15, the adult EST training.
That's
So
scary.
yeah, yeah, it's a lot. But, I did the Landmark Forum when I was 13 years old, and, I was barely a teenager. I was in not even high school. Was I in high school? No, not even in high school
Mm-mm.
yet. At the time, I was homeschooled. But I did the Landmark Forum, and then I went on to continue doing, the advanced programs they had, the leadership programs, all before the age of 18. So I had an exception to be in their leadership program at 15, which was wild. And then I proceeded to work there for almost 5 years, from the age of 18 to 21 or 22. So all of my formative years were inside of, Landmark.
Wow. Do you want to give us just like I know we're going to talk more about that in some future episodes. We have, for our guests out there, we have a really exciting series that's going to be coming up. We're going to do a series specifically with people who grew up in the work. That's what we call it inside of Landmark. But just anything here now as a starter, like what that was like how do you feel that your teenage, I'm just sort of curious, like how were your teenage years different? I mean, mine were pretty different too. I got pregnant and had a baby at 15 and then was off onto, adult life.
Yeah.
But I'm curious what that was like growing up in
Yeah.
that conversation, as near as you can
Yeah.
tell.
Listen, I at the time would have told you it was awesome. I think that, I, they're not the thing that where it's hard, right, is that there's value in the programs, right, which we know, but there's also like a lot of things we don't see that are going on behind the scenes or intentions behind the distinctions, right, that we don't realize until later on that we're there. Manipulative, like there's a
Yeah.
manipulative aspect to everything. So, but at the time, I mean, living as a teenager doing the Landmark Forum, it really, freed me up. Doing just the Landmark Forum before I had got involved into anything else, got me freed up with my dad. And at the time, I had gotten complete about being molested and like things that were major for me at 13 that were holding me back from being self-expressed. I felt at the time like a weight was lifted off my shoulders. But, as I wanted to continue making a difference, right? Because I realized like making a difference was what was going to have me be loved and praised within Landmark
Mm,
specifically. Right.
okay.
Then, of course, as I continued assisting or volunteering my time and doing leadership programs, I learned really quickly that, sharing the Landmark Forum and sharing about transformation was the access to having Landmark like me. Right. And I was very much
Gotcha.
wanting to be liked as a
Right.
young
So it's
13
kind of
or
like
14.
we go to high school, or
Yeah.
whatever, and we get liked because we're like in with the right crowd
Yeah.
or we're,
Yeah.
have the right
Yeah.
shoes or, I mean, I
Yeah.
remember so desperately. ages me a little bit, but wanting the white Nikes with the red swoosh, like,
Yeah.
or Keds. Keds were huge when I was in middle school, actually, or
It's
junior
that,
high.
and I was made fun of a lot as a child, right? So, like, I didn't ever have that fitting in. So, because I've done the landmark form before I started high school, I didn't really need that, right? In school, I had it from something else or outside an outside source. And so that was my whole high school career. I mean, when I think back, right, the landmark had me sharing with my friends' parents about doing the landmark forum because you had to have them
Interesting.
do it in order for my friends to do it, or creating a introduction at their home, or sharing with my teachers, right? Like what I was up to, like to create a project in the school. And so like I was going around this weird kid, like talking about, oh, there's this program. And, I always felt super embarrassed and super awkward, but, I was trying to be unreasonable, which was a huge distinction, right, in Landmark. And,
Wow.
pushing myself past what I was comfortable doing in order to create some huge breakthrough for myself. So, I was trained at a very young age to always be creating breakthroughs, always, breakdowns equal breakthroughs, right? Pushing yourself past your comfort zone makes you, a go-getter, right? Somebody who's out for possibility in the world. And so I just ate it all up. And
Well,
so,
and you can hear, like, you're formulating, I mean, from 13 on, like, it's a core aspect when we're formulating our identity. So that's really intense. And then, and I know we're going to come back to that as some of the work you're doing now, but there's something else that you said that really caught my attention that I'd never thought of before, which was, so there you are in high school and, a kid, and you're being asked by this organization to create introductions, to introduce your friends, parents, and teachers to the work. That's
yes,
weird, dude. Like,
yeah,
I know that if I'd heard that 20 years ago, I would have been like, oh, that's so inspiring. But
yes, and
now I'm like, whoa, that's weird. Like, that would be really weird. And it's weird from the perspective of, supposedly this is a personal development company that's about you and your development and your
yeah,
expression. And
yeah,
that's the bait and switch that a lot of people don't realize or overlook. Like, and they say, well, you can choose not to do that part. Not really. Not when your community, when your acceptance and belonging is intertwined with that. It's not a choice in the way we think of choice.
no.
So psychologically and emotionally. So yeah, that must have been so
Well,
wild.
and
What
you
was
know
it?
what's
Your
great?
friends must have,
Yeah. Well, they were all a little like weird. Yeah, I was very hesitant. I mean, I still had some sense of like this is not normal, right? So I also would like kind of lie and say I did talk to a friend, or even if I didn't, like I was
sure.
still like I was
Hey,
rebellious.
we all called the answering machine and those phone
I mean, I'm
banks.
trying. I was gonna say, it's interesting when you said about choice, right? Like at the time, you're led to believe too that you actually are choosing to do those things. Like I very much would have said, no, I'm choosing to do these things, right? Like it wasn't like we had like this. It's very interesting, right? You believe wholeheartedly that this is being sourced from you, not from Landmark, right? It's your choice. You're at the source of it. You're causing the matter because you're like that's somebody who's powerful, right? Somebody who's at the source of everything. So
Well,
yeah,
that's the twist on the two of the primary distinctions, responsibility and choice. So responsibility says in that lexicon, and pretty much all human potential. I found that this is common across them all. Like Scientology, Nexium, like just pick one. They're all the same. The teen
yeah,
schools, all of them are teaching this version of responsibility that says you are 100% responsible for everything all the time, everywhere. And
yeah,
I think the idea is, I think there's something in that is meant to be empowering, which is
yeah,
that if I see life as if I'm the source, then I don't feel disempowered. I don't feel
yeah,
small or out of control or whatnot. So it's sort of psychologically soothing in a very deceptive and disassociative way.
yeah,
Then, which that's the problem, because then it doesn't hold up with contact with reality. But the other thing is choice. And I was talking with Chris Shelton about this the other day, and I think we're going to do a little episode about it. So I don't want to spoil it, but he was like, bring choice to me in Landmark. And what I really got in talking with him back and forth is whether it's meant this way or not, it comes down to choosing it's supposed to be choosing what is. Rocks are hard, water's wet. The floor is down there, the ceiling is up. It's like choosing what is. But then it becomes, choosing that person who's abusing you. I've heard that story a number of times from people now, not just one, but multiple people, or choosing things that are should not be chosen and are not chosen. It completely dismisses any idea of coercive control or any of that, but it really sets you up to be victimized in a huge
Yes.
way. It sets up for the victimized to choose their own victimization.
Mm.
And then responsibility gives you the tool to go, but I'm not a victim because I'm the source of my own victimization. I mean, it's just a loop that is so unhealthy. All
Yeah.
right, so there you are. So then you do all this stuff as a teenager. So when did the staff, so then what happens? So you
So
graduate, and then how do you
I
end up on staff?
So I ended up on staff in a really interesting way. I was leading introductions to the Landmark Forum for teens and young people. So I was leading to other teens, which is
Okay.
where they started to train me in, producing and
All leadership training
we need to
begins.
account,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So that started, and then there was a staff member at the time who had discovered she had cancer, and she needed to be out for a while. And she said, "I want you to take over my desk for 2 weeks." And they made me feel really special because they got special approval for me at such a young age to be on staff part time, which was like 30 hours a week. Mind you, I'm still in high school. I'm still in high school, right?
Yeah. How old were you here?
I was 18. I
Okay.
was just turned 18, but I hadn't graduated yet.
All right.
And so I was like, "Oh my God, this is my dream. I've always wanted to be a staff member." Because, as when you're assisting, you think of staff members or people who lead the programs as higher up. Like there's levels. And even though they say that we're all one, there's levels, right? So you think of that. So it's like, oh my God, I've made it. So I said yes. I started after I was done with high school. My mom would drive me down to the office. I would change my clothes and I'd proceed to work from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m., Monday through Saturday or whatever, right? And then they said, when are you ever gonna, when are you graduating? When are you graduating? When are you gonna come on full time? Because the staff member had to be out longer. And so I was like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to graduate high school. I'm going to drop out a couple months
Yes.
early because this is such a great opportunity. This is
Real?
for
Oh
real.
my God.
Well, listen, it's an opportunity of a lifetime, right? When you get to work for Landmark. And so not realizing that everyone could work for Landmark, but I went to I dropped out early. I left high school 2 months early. I didn't graduate. I went all 4 years. And I said, well, you know what? I'm going to get so much work experience in the corporate world, right? Which a little did I know
Right.
what was about to happen. And so I dropped out and I started working there at 18. And then is when the crazy ride started.
Oh my God. So, okay, so I just asked a couple things. What did
Yeah.
your mom think of that? Like, so what's your mom think of all this? Now, you said she did
Well,
the S training, so she's kind of one
every
of the
training
lifers, sort of.
lifer. She redid the whole Landmark curriculum when she was, like a year prior to me doing mine. And she thought it was great. My mom, this is the thing, and I've had many conversations with her, and she obviously has a different perspective now, but at the time, she wanted the best for her child, and she saw an environment where people supported me and I was like, lit up and always inspired and whatever, right? And who wouldn't want that for their child, right? The best. And so she also, realized that like, she had the same thought, right? I enrolled her or got her to believe the same thing that I was enrolled in, which is that this is a great opportunity. And, we can always get my GED later or whatever, right? It's not that big of a deal. It's only
Oh my
yeah,
gosh,
I know. So
that's
that was, and,
crazy.
that was a big, I don't have many regrets in life, but that was a big regret of mine, especially when I was on staff and when I left staff, because not only did I leave high school, I also lost my friendships. Like I lost the friendships I had formed because I had no time to hang out with them, right? Like I was working 70 hours a week. So it was like I didn't get to go to like, like my senior whatever, formal or my prom. Like I didn't get to complete something that I had worked so hard for 4 years.
Just
And
curious. Go ahead, sorry.
no, no, go ahead.
Did your manager, did the people that were inviting on staff know that you were dropping out of high school to go on staff?
So this is what I will tell you. No, because they didn't care enough to ask. They didn't care enough to
Right.
ask. They cared more about me coming on as a full-time staff member. And I think I had said, yeah, I completed school or whatever. But obviously I didn't, it wasn't anywhere near the time when I went on staff. It was in March.
Oh,
Graduation's not
right.
till June. Context clues, right? They didn't pay attention to any of that because they didn't care. They cared about them, which is the theme of what we've discovered, right? Or what I've discovered about the company is that it's all about them. Nobody ever asked. Nobody ever asked. Nobody had my best interest in mind.
That's a sneaky piece about high control. We refer to Landmark as a high control group at the
I
very
control.
least. And And I think when people outside of that lexicon think of high control, they think of like slavery, like the doors are locked or there's some kind of force, but it's not, it's emotional manipulation.
Yes.
And that is controlling you very much like a domestic abuse situation. Like we've learned this now. We have enough Hallmark movies about people staying in domestic abuse situations because of the combination of the emotional manipulation, abuse, the everything in your life is now connected to this thing, your reputation, your money, your sense of self, and all of that. And I like the way you did point out another thing that I think is really hard to get kind of from the outside, but there is a mission. And
Yes.
you are on this grand mission. And we've seen this creep out from organizations like this into business workplaces. And it is pretty much turnkey where you see exploitation.
Yeah.
So where they get people to commit to the organization via the mission over their personal best interest. And
Yep.
that's what starts to make something destructive.
Yeah.
And, not a benign group that is there for your best interest. And what's a little bit crazy about this is the whole product is you being yourself, you having your best life, you da da da. But staff is all about you're going to become a force. You're going to be a force of nature, and you're
Well,
going
and
to.
you're an example of the work in the world. Like, even though you're not out in the world, you're working there, but you are the prime example of what it is to be the highest expression of the work. Like, as a staff member, you really are like the person that people look up to. And so, and you've got volunteers around you and people who you're training, right? I was 18. I didn't know, how to train. I had 40-year-old people on the team, like.
I heard Sarah Edmondson say a big part of my deconstruction has been listening to a little bit culty, which I just love. And Sarah and Nippy have been great resources and friends. But Sarah said on an episode one time, she goes, I got to be popular. And that hit
That's
me
right.
so hard. I was like,
Yeah.
yes, that's
Yes.
exactly it. Because you don't,
Yep.
you don't, it gives you that whole same experience of being popular, being the it
Yeah.
person. You do have
That's
all these
right.
people. And I can't imagine in a center like Los Angeles, which is one of the largest
Yeah.
centers. So there's a lot of people
A
going
lot. Like,
through.
any
So,
given time, 30 to 50 people around you in the office, courses every weekend, 12 staff members, right? Like, you also form community amongst your staff people, right? Like, it's like, and then you've got like, you put on that name tag and you feel like you're unstoppable, right? There's
yes.
nothing you can't do. And so for sure, yeah, that sense of self is like really attached to the title they give you. But they also, it's not something I made up myself. It's also something they literally tell you, which is like, you are a staff member. You've got to be a staff member, right?
You
Like,
are the enterprise in the world.
for that,
Never mind you're not in the world. You're not
no.
participating in the world in any way, shape, or
If
form.
you have
You're only
something going on
participating
with
there.
you, if you have something going on with you internal, that's just internal. Set it aside and set it aside for the bigger picture here, because you are now us. Like, and you're like, oh my God, this is so cool. Like, you're just like in it, like, yeah, give me more,
Oh my God, you're
because
expressing
at
that
that
so
point
well.
you've already, and I even looked at Anne when I went on staff, because I recently discovered this. They made me choose to be a staff member before they hired me. Like, my call with HR
Mm.
was all about me being at the source or at choice of my request to be on staff. They made me request to be a staff member. And I remember her telling me this, because she said, you're young, and I don't want you to look back on this 5 years or 10 years from now and regret that you did this. So you really have to be a request to be here. So in that moment, it sounds very powerful, right? But
Unless you know anything about neuroscience.
yeah,
But
unless
yeah,
you
go
know
ahead.
anything, it put you at you thought, right? Like, I am now the request to be here. So anything that happens to me here, it was because I'm requesting to be here. This is, you know what I mean? So it totally points the finger over at you. They don't have to take responsibility because
Well,
you're the request.
you hear in a lot of other groups, if you watch The Vow and you watch things like that, that groups, Scientology, Nexium, they had collateral. So they would have
Yes.
people give over secrets, and then that's what they use to control people. No, in Landmark, what they use is your word and
Yes.
choice, exactly as you just described it. So
Yes.
there you are, barely 18,
Yes.
not even out of high school. And
No.
they're having you choose. Why I made the crack about neuroscience, because what we know, the prefrontal cortex executive function isn't even wired together yet at that point.
Mhm.
And what's funny is the program I used to teach, you couldn't do under the age of 23,
Yeah, correct.
because we knew that the brain was still not fully
Yeah.
finished.
And they told me that. That's funny. They told me that. So they also knew.
Yes. Yeah, no, they did. I think, I don't know whether they knew, certainly not that HR person, what that meant, but
Yeah.
the designers of the program
Mm,
they at least had the opportunity to know. When we're indoctrinated in something, and I do think that the leaders of Landmark are some of the most indoctrinated people,
crazy.
I don't think it's fully fair to relate to that knowing until they go through the kind of knowing you and I have been going through for the last year.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about your. So when you go on staff, what position were you? So tell us a little bit about your
So
staff
I
experience. Give us
worked
a
in the
sense of your
yeah, yeah.
staff
So
journey.
I worked in the family division, which managed at the time they had programs
Obvious.
for
Yep.
teenagers and young people, right? Of course. And I did that. And then they had me do a little bit of everything because they didn't have a full-time position for me, but they wanted me because they would refer to me as a sponge. And I was their little sponge. Isn't that
Yes.
cute? So cute. Not really. But anyway, so they had me really actually kind of cover people's desks, like whether it was registering people into the Landmark Forum, calling out, right, cold calling out, doing the fulfillment of like when people already registered, like talking to them and getting them to the first day of their course. Like I kind of learned every little department, but family division was like my main job for like 8 months. And then they moved me over to the seminar department, and I became the seminar. They have 10 session seminars for those people who don't know after the forum. And so I became like the seminar manager. And I did that for
Okay.
a long time. And then I did advanced course, like the
Mhm.
advanced course in self-expression leadership program manager toward the end. I think that's what I was doing. Yeah. So over 5 years, I had about maybe, I don't know, 7 jobs. And within those seven,
Gotcha.
as we probably know, and maybe you don't know this, but it's not just one job, right? You've got like 20 other jobs underneath you that you rely on volunteers to fulfill. But that's what I did when I started. I worked in the family division, which was really, honestly, I thought perfect, because I'm
Yes.
18, and
Right.
they thought it was perfect because who better to get a teenager to stay in a course that wants to not be in a course than a teenager, right? Like somebody who
Right.
hasn't done that. So perfect way to manipulate.
Yes. So what do you want us to know about? Because a lot of people out listening that, Landmark says it has 3.5 million graduates. We don't really know the number.
Yeah.
Honestly, I think if you were to add up all the people who did the S years, the forum, then Landmark when it becomes Landmark in 1991. So I don't know where that number starts from, but there are millions, millions, especially given the S training. So there are millions and millions of people who've done this work. And then there's lots of people that have worked with coaches that coach this kind of work, or the affiliates that teach it in business organizations. So it's
Yeah.
out there. So, but I'm telling you what I've learned in the last year, because, folks who've listened to the Confronting the Line, they know that I kind of have life before my book
Hmm.
and then life after my book. And my book is about the in between life that I lived for most of my adult life, and then finding out about the abuse and whatnot that was happening around Werner that had me start to re-examine everything. But it
Yeah.
wasn't until my book came out and I started hearing from people like you
Yeah.
that I started to hear about what staff, the primary staff area, which is the centers division, was really like. Yes, I was a staff member, but I was kind of off in happy camp. And it was hard. I won't lie. It was hard. We worked long, long, long hours. And, I was very sick when I left, mostly because of the stress of trying to hit the targets and that internalization of like the mission of transformation of life itself is on your shoulders. And then also I've now figured out I was pretty much delivering a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy without really understanding what that was or how to take care of myself. So things like that are really soft compared to what those of you that were on center staff. So give us a sense of what it was like really,
Yeah.
whatever you're comfortable sharing about what
Yeah.
it was
No,
like
I,
to
I'm
be in a center as a staff member.
I've been gone for over 10 years, almost 10 years now. So it's really like, but it was quite nasty. I mean, I started, the moment I started working there full time and I had, gone on full time is when I think that, I started to get screamed at, like my manager at the time, she would constantly scream and yell, just not even at me, just other staff members, but, it was constant threat, constant yelling at, constant processing you in closed door meetings about why you hadn't met your targets or what was off about you, like what was something had to have been off with your integrity this, integrity that, right? Just the constant blaming of me,
Yeah,
right?
it's
Blame
never the system. It's
never.
never, I remember having that conversation one time with my manager. I'm like, look, you want me to produce a 10% year over year increase. You give me no leads. I have to go
Yep.
find all my own leads. And, I have to obey the FTC, like, don't talk to anybody who hasn't talked to us in 18 months, et cetera, unless, of course, you can get a friend to get them to talk to you. Then the
Right.
18-month clock stick. It was really challenging. And because I am kind of back out in the workplace, and I'm discovering that a lot of sales things have sort of gone that way, unfortunately, which is more exploitive. But yeah, you had to produce this increase, but you weren't given the resources really. I mean,
No, and
occasionally, sometimes if you had a good relationship, like in our case, you could maybe get a list of people who had completed the curriculum but haven't participated in a year. So it'd be great if you could help
right.
get them back in the fold, kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, that was interesting. And it wasn't just that I was being held to account for my job in the family division, but they also had me consistently, like, not in the family division. Like I said, I was in other people's jobs, covering other desks, expected to still produce the targets for one department, but then, being dealt with, screamed at about why I wasn't dealing, doing my targets in the one department that I wasn't,
Mm.
working in. So it was confusing to me. And I used to speak up about it. I mean, I really was pretty, not afraid to say something, because I was like, well, you're having me do this, this, and this. Like, and it wasn't, listen, I was their sponge, like, really, like, I was
Mhm.
heating up food for our center manager. Like, I was going and taking stuff out of her car. Like, it was not just working for Landmark. I was also like an assistant to the manager of the office, which was highly inappropriate. But, so there was that. And it got to the point where after about a year of that, not even a year, a full year, I reported the manager to HR. I reported the manager to HR. I recorded her because I felt threatened. And I was like, I'm going to record what she's saying, for my own safety. And I submitted the recordings to the human resources department. And I said, hey, at the time I thought it was the manager, right? I didn't know that it was the whole system. But
Right. That's like me. I thought it was Werner. It turns out
yeah.
it's the whole
You think
system.
it's
Yeah.
one part, well, and because you really believe that the work is good, right? So, and why wouldn't no one's ever done that to me before? So I reported it. I got dealt with for recording someone without getting their permission, and told that it was illegal, and that, I could have repercussions. And they then proceeded to tell the center manager that I recorded them, which
No.
violated every trust I had in anything. And you can imagine then that person was very weird with me, and very highly overly nice, like, went out of their way to, like, just in case I was recording them again. And I became a problem. And then Joan Rosenberg, who, Warner's
Yep.
sister, came to the LA Center, and
Head of the
she,
centers, or
yeah,
was. Now she's
yeah,
on the board
yeah,
of
yeah,
directors.
yeah, right. She came to the LA Center, met with me about what I had done, and proceeded to tell me, "Why didn't you talk to me? Why didn't you come to me? Don't go to HR. You should have come to me. You should have gone directly to your manager. You should have done something," like, gaslighting me into why did I do something so stupid, basically, to go to HR instead of just going through the committed lines of listening and speaking, which I was trained to do, right? Which is go to the person who can do something about it, no gossip. Like, it was a whole highly, like,
Where is HR in that hierarchy? I
right.
mean, isn't HR, yeah.
Yeah,
I coached somebody to go to
and
HR
that's
one
where I
time.
learned that I learned HR is not, at least for Landmark, is not for the staff, it's for the company. And then, as I've obviously through the years, I've learned that's, HR was like this with Joan Rosenberg, who had her hands in everything. Listen, I was a young 18-year-old kid, but I reported it because I knew my gut told me something was wrong. Like, something, I found the emails recently, and in the email I said to the HR, I said, here's a recording of so and so talking down to me. Like, I distinguished it right away. I went, something's wrong here, right? This is not what Landmark says they're about. But obviously, then I was told I wasn't, there was something wrong with me. I believed it. And so I just became quiet, honestly, about it, because I realized HR wasn't going to do anything. And then they got rid of that manager, brought in a new manager, and they were, whatever, I don't care. He was great.
He
He
would
was
go
great.
by he, I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure.
he was great for a while until he wasn't, right? And but during that time when it was all great, we were doing increases and everybody was being celebrated. I fell back in love with what I thought at the time was what my life was for and what I was doing. So, I fell in love with a new person, a new abuser. And then that proceeded to happen again for another 2.5 years, right? The yelling and the screaming. And this then became like more like he became more not physically abusive toward people, but like throwing stuff, like throwing clipboards across the office or banging down on desks or trying to pretend to like lunge at someone, right? I'd hear from former staff or staff members, coworkers going, so and so just almost put their hands on my neck, right? Like I'm over trying to produce this huge like possibility and I'm hearing about so and so doing whatever in their office with the blinds closed or like the door shut or and then it would happen to me, right? Like the screaming. So I started freezing up. I started to not know how to use the distinctions to get out of conversations because you do learn when you're working there that the only way you can get out of these uncomfortable, horrible, drilling conversations is to say the right thing, admit that you're wrong, right? Like I was
Right.
trained to then say, I'm an asshole. Like I would say it all the time, I'm like, I'm the asshole here. I was wrong. You're right. I this, just to
Right.
get out of the conversation to stop being verbally abused. So that just went on forever. And I mean, and I don't know. I don't know why. It's funny. I'm looking at why did I not ever say anything? But I guess
Well, it's slow. I think you just described a couple of things that are important for folks to understand. And I know you're still deconstructing and
yeah,
unpacking. So am I.
yeah,
So we're in the middle, folks. So, maybe a little sloppy here, but the thing is it's slow, like you said. So the old manager you complained about goes out, the new manager comes in, there's a whole period of sort of, in abuse terms we'd call it grooming, and then
yes, grooming.
there's
Yeah,
a whole period of grooming of like,
yeah,
yes, and as you're kind of winning the relationship. In Landmark we'd call it getting related,
getting
like being
related. Yeah,
related. Yeah, so
yeah,
you build that relationship, but given the whole system, this is something that I've really learned and I'm still learning about. But in my book, I don't say any of the details of the abuse that happens around Werner, but you just described a fair amount of it. So what I've been shocked is that the source who's been in and out involved, I mean, always getting money, always involved in that way, but in and out in terms of the regular engagement with the enterprise. But the culture that the whole thing was born inside of, the Est culture, the Werner culture, all of that goes on. And as far as I know, it goes on to today. So now I do believe they have tried to clean it up to some extent, but until they actually question the foundation, you can't clean it up. And I think there's more, and I think we're unconcealing it. Tony and I are very committed. We're now deeply looking at the work itself, not just the structures. But it's slow and you're there for a big, big purpose. Transformation of life itself is on
yes,
the line. So you
yes,
kind of have, I talk in my book about go along to get along. That's kind of the personal level. But then you also have this, like, you don't want to, and you don't want to lose your popularity or your position or
yeah,
your place.
yeah,
You've told everybody in your whole life, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. So you're reputationally completely linked in there.
yeah,
And and then it's kind of slow. And like in most abusive situations, I mean, did you experience this when if somebody went over the line, cussing, swearing, calling you names, would they come back and apologize? I'm just
yes,
curious,
yes, always.
would they come back and
Always. Yeah,
apologize?
because you have this culture of getting complete, right? Getting complete
Okay.
about anything through communication. So you also learn that abuse is okay as long as you get it complete, right? Like it's never not okay. It's or you learn that, well, who were you being that had me do that? Right? Like that was
Yes.
the big thing in at least my center was who were you being that had me react that way? Right? So gaslighting. I mean, it's just typical
Well,
gaslighting, but
Eric Rojas told
yeah,
us the story. He's told it publicly, so I can share it here. But he told us the story of being strangled, which that is what it's called when somebody puts their hands on your throat, even if they don't squeeze. If they're threatening your airway, that's called strangling. And we now understand that to be. There's been several studies done that is one of the biggest precursors to physical assault and even like a partnericide, feminicide, or I don't know what it's called when a female kills a male. It doesn't happen very often, but it could. But that kind of thing. And, he took it all the way. He did all the things. He went to the manager and the manager's manager, blah, 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 took it all the way to Joan Rosenberg. And Joan said to him, well, who were you being that he
yeah,
felt he needed to do that? And, at that point, now you start to think, I'm crazy.
yes,
So, but yeah, so you think it's you kind of like, I mean, and that's exactly what happens in domestic
yeah,
violence. I mean,
it
this
is.
is an organization that has enculturated a form of domestic violence
Yes,
into its staff.
yes,
That's what I've learned. Nobody's been more sad and upset to learn that than me.
yeah,
So I've spent many evenings, like crying,
Yeah.
just confronting, like, what?
Yeah.
Because the people hurt were people that I worked with and played with, and
Yeah.
like that. So it's slow. So that's
Yes.
interesting that you're asking. So, well, wait, why did I say? Why
Yeah,
did
yeah,
I?
yeah, and because when it happens too, you get it complete, and then you also don't have any time to self-reflect. So, like, you're working 70 hours a week, right? So I was there 9 a.m. to 10 p.m. I was exhausted. I'd go to bed, wake up the next morning, and go back and expect it to be a whole, a new possibility, a new bright light. So you don't ever have any time to think about, what happened last night or yesterday was really fucked up or whatever, right? Like, it was
Yeah.
messed up, you know? And so I learned, yeah, it all happened like it was all little in the moment, but when you look back on it, it's like, oh my God, when that was said or done to me or X, Y, and Z, what happened? That was just abuse, right? And so it was verbal. It was also threatening, right? Like, there was the
Mm,
manager at the time also threatened to throw me through a window. There were things said where this manager particularly would go into a rage and, like, eyes would change, like, and be like, I'm gonna throw you through an effing window. I want to throw you through a window. You just frustrate me so much. And the only
right.
reason you're still working here is because of me, right? Like, the writing's on the wall. You're going to be out of here if you don't get your stuff together. So it's the constant threat, not just physical threat, but, like, and what I haven't shared, which is that I lived with my mom. I was taking care of her. My grandmother had passed away. I was the
Mm.
sole income. And so I
Oh,
also had on my back, right? Like, I had to take care of my mom, and they knew that. They knew that. So it wasn't like I could just say, F you, I'm out of here.
right.
I was deathly afraid of losing my job, and when they knew that is when they started using that as a threat.
Mm.
Putting me on a warning. You're gonna go on a warning. You're gonna lose this job. You're gonna, so yeah, all of that is just, it was
Well,
multi-layered.
somebody who was in staff once told me that Joan said on a call when they were trying to move away from the centers models, which they tried for a long time, starting in the mid 2000s. No, 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 you couldn't do that because if you didn't have people to beat up for the results, you would get no results. So
Yeah.
it's baked in. It is a
Yeah.
feature, not a bug, and
Yes. Well, and
it's part of
LA was
the
managed by Joan, right? LA was a big Joan center.
right.
She directly managed us. So we actually we were managed sometimes by her. Like, we would message her,
Mm,
right? And give her our results. We also had, unlike other offices, we had hourly promises, not every 2 hour promises, but we would make a promise every hour, and we would have to fill out what we did, and it would get scanned directly to Joan, right? And she would call, or she would message, or, like, hey, why did you not keep your word this last? So it was the micromanaging was even worse, right, than what other staff members may have experienced in other smaller centers, because LA didn't have any room for mistakes. Like, not at all.
no,
Yeah.
they were a leader in the enterprise. I mean, they
Yeah.
were like one of the star
Yeah.
flagship. Los Angeles and New York were the two.
Yes. LA
Then
and New York.
Chicago, and then Seattle. Seattle, when my husband was the center manager, he beat Chicago, I think, a couple quarters, and it was a big deal. Like, we made it up from fourth to third for a minute, and then we were back to fourth. But yeah,
Yeah.
wow. So that's pretty intense. So there you are. And all of that it becomes normal. I mean, you can hear, if anybody who knows anything about abusive environments, you can hear the abuse that's in there. So, but we don't know that at the time. You don't
No.
know that for a long time yet. So
Yeah.
how did you leave staff? Like,
I'm
how'd you
glad
end up getting off? Did you get
they
fired? Like, what?
yeah, they fired me. They fired me for not meeting. The thing is, I'll say, toward the end of my staff, I started to become more rebellious. I got older, I was 22 or 21, and I started to realize, like, this is not right. Like, I would say things like, well, why can't I question this policy? Like, this doesn't make sense. And I would make exceptions for things that, I was like, I was taking care of the customer. I was actually taking care of people, right? Which, not trying to,
Mm,
like, do what they wanted me to do. And so I would fight back. I started to very little fight back, and the moment you start to fight back, they realize, if they can't mold you to be who they want you to be, then they get you out, right? Because you're not for possibility or whatever. So what they did was they started putting me on warnings that were literally, like, I mean, I could have probably sued at the time, because it was like impossible to achieve the warning, right? Like the amount of things they put on the paper was like, you just couldn't do it, right? On your own.
Mm.
So, and I was smart enough at the time to realize that. And so I just wrote it out, to be honest. I wrote it out. I started talking to other people who around Landmark to find another job. I got myself another job. And then when they called me in and said, we're letting you go, I said, okay. I just said, fine.
Gotcha. Yeah.
But I was heartbroken. I mean, what I never did share with them. And, like I really vividly remember my last day on staff. Like I went out, I was already 21. I went out to a bar and I got hammered. Like I was
Mm.
just so upset, and couldn't process what was going on with me because I had just lost the love of my life, like I had lost everything that I gave my life to. And I knew I was never going to be able to go back. Right. And so, that was really hard. That was a hard
Mhm.
time, but I also was just like my brain was formed to think that I had to like create a possibility out of everything. So I moved on very quickly without dealing with the actual pain and hurt, right? Of losing
Of
something.
course. Yeah.
Because you have to be on, like I can't not be a possibility, right? Like that's not okay.
Right.
So I had to be an
Well, and it
example.
becomes habitual,
Yes.
internalized and habitual. I know we've got our little Facebook book club, which, is sort of synonymous with Landmark Recovery Group. And as we were all just kind of working through the various stages and things of where we're at and the different experiences, because there's a lot of really different experiences. If you didn't go on staff, you don't know about this side, and you kind of don't know how the soup is made. You're
Yeah.
just eating the soup.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, wow, thanks for sharing that. And then, so then you left
Yes.
and you kind of go on about your life
Yep.
and you're out there. And I know you got a really successful business going
Yeah, now
along
I
the
do.
way.
For
Yeah.
for a while, I just chilled. I worked at a real estate office. I really, it was the best job because I was not accountable for anything. Was able to just, I was shocked when my boss let me take a sick day or like normal or
Hmm.
like at the end of the day would come to my desk and say, "Thank you so much for what you did today." I remember I would post about these things on my Facebook. I'd be like, "Today my boss came to me and said thank you." Like I was like, but I also would deal with like constant, keeping receipts of everything, like always being in fear of being dealt with or called into the office. But over the years, I realized like that's never once happened. Like that's never once happened in this environment, right? This is not normal because you've
Mm.
got to remember, I never worked prior. Landmark was my first job.
Right. That was your only job.
Landmark was
Right.
my first
Right.
job. Yeah. And so I had nothing to compare it to. And I was told when I worked there that there's nothing out in the world like what you're doing, right? Like you'll never find something better. So when I went out in the world, I was like, this isn't half bad. And these people aren't even Landmark people and they're nice.
Well, and how was the pay? I'm just curious because
It
Landmark
was,
is notorious
it,
for paying as
what,
little as they can get
I'll
away
tell
with.
you, no, it was hard. It was the same pay. It was the same pay. I had to take the same pay and I also didn't have benefits. I, can I tell you how much I started making when I worked at Landmark when I was 18?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
made $37,000 for 65 hours a week
Gotcha. In Los Angeles.
in Los Angeles, and I only ever got up to like 46,000 after 5 years, right?
Which honestly is actually pretty high for a lot of the landmarks because you were in the bigger
Right,
center. So you had,
right,
yeah, it was
right.
a little bit higher. Yeah.
Yeah, but,
Yeah.
for LA, taking care of my mom and everything, I was borrowing money. I lived paycheck to paycheck, and so, but, no, the pay was the same, honestly, and then, but the thing is, the hours weren't the same, right? I was working 40 hours a
Right.
week, and I actually got to go, like, take a nap at 5 PM if I wanted to, or 6 PM. I could, like, relax and, like, have the weekend off, and so, it's worth a lot of money, when you're
A friend, I think you know who she is, Dale Dickens. She has a fun little
yeah,
podcast. She's on pause right now, Life After Landmark. But she shared with me that she got a job picking up garbage at the airport. And she said, she goes, I just look for anything that I did not have to be accountable for anything. I didn't have
yes,
anybody screaming at me. I didn't have, and I
yes,
have another good friend of mine who I think she managed to retire, but also was like, I'm going to just go get a job like a Trader Joe's or whatever.
yes,
So I can just show up, do my job and leave. And that's, I now understand that to be a symptom or symptomatic of, emotional distress, if not
yeah,
trauma. Like we need a break. You need that
yeah,
break time.
yeah,
So then what happened? So that when I met you, so my
yes.
my book came out, and I don't know if you'd had any kind of thoughts or awakening other than like, hey, this ain't so bad out here in the real world.
No,
before my
I
book came out.
called it for what it was afterwards. I used to I still volunteered, like, for many years after I left and, in the organization, and so and I would tell staff, I'd be like, "That's this is kind of abusive." Like, I would say, "This is, verbally abusive." I would just call it out because I felt like I was gaining my power back by naming it for what it was, but still being there and them still relying on me. So it was my little getting back at them, which wasn't healthy, but, I did. And then, but I didn't know anyone else felt that way. The book was when I found out that you had written the book and that there were other people talking, that was the moment I was like, "Oh my goodness." Like, I couldn't believe the amount of people,
Mm.
I joined your group, the Facebook group, and read the book, and I was like, "Good for her." Like, somebody had to say it, but then I also didn't realize, like, that everyone, like, for the most part, a lot of people had the same experience in different cities, different time frames of different years, right? Like, um, and that is when the whole aha breaking open, like, thing happened. But it was really hard for me to like see all of that. And also because I
Well,
had
because we also in those very first days, like, so my book came out a year ago now, but it was a year and 1 month. And I know it was really hard for me too, because as we started to talk to each other
Mhm.
and people started to talk,
Yeah.
it was like, Wait, wait, he didn't sell the company for $1? Wait, wait, you mean he got paid $18 million and my ESOP is gone? What?" Like, as we started to compare, wait, that, I mean, I'll never forget. I know exactly where I was when I got the message when Eric messaged me that he had been strangled, by his center manager. And why it was so shocking to me was because that was one of the moves when people came to me, Warner staff, some people from Warner staff came to me and said, "We need help." That was one of the moves. So I was like, wait, how can that be a company wide practice? Like, I mean, it was just so startling. I remember talking to, I think I was talking to Sarah Edmondson actually a couple of weeks after the book, and all, literally by then hundreds of people, I mean, it wasn't quite hundreds yet, it would become that, but coming out and like telling me and talking in the group. And that was when I put that group together, because I was like,
Yeah.
wait, we should talk to each other.
Yeah, it
Except
was
for the
great.
more we talked to each other, the more honestly upsetting it was.
It was upsetting. Yeah.
I remember laying in bed talking to Sarah, just like shaking. I was like under 3 blankets and I'm like shaking. And I'm like, "Sarah, you don't understand. It was everywhere. It was everywhere. People were hurt." Like this kind of shock, as it
Yeah.
were. And
Yeah.
so it
I was
was
I got
hard.
angry, I started getting a lot of
Hmm.
anger. 'Cause I'm like, "God," but it was almost too much for me to process in such a short time, and I've talked to I had to retreat for a while. I left the Facebook
Yeah.
group. I was like, "I'm fine. I've healed from this." And
Mm.
then, but I hadn't, right? I still constantly so I'll tell you what I do now, right? Because so who I do have a business, right? So I did work paycheck to paycheck, and I kept doing that for 4 years. Then COVID hit, and during COVID, I started a business selling houseplants. Like, I was selling plants on Facebook Marketplace. I saw someone else doing it. I thought I'd give it a try. And overnight, really, it was a success. People wanted greenery inside their homes. So I ran with it and kind of, just was myself. And I was like, oh, people like me for who I really am. Right. And I started going through social media, and, we had people buy off of our balcony for 3 years. I sold 20,000 plants. And then TikTok came around with their version of like e-commerce. And I was like, let me try that. And overnight we sold 300 plants. First time we went live on TikTok. And now we've hit 88,000 plants sold in 2 years on TikTok. It's, a very successful plant business. And, I love it. It's great for somebody who's had the kind of trauma I have, because I don't have to account to anyone. But when you're a business owner, you still do, right? Like, I still have a
Hmm.
person at TikTok that I talk to about my goals. And so I found myself anytime, even now, like, if I feel like I have too many things to do in a day, or there's too many things happening at once, I go into a freeze response, right? Which I've learned is like a trauma response. But
Right.
I literally freeze up, get hot. I can't think. I get tired. Like, and I go into a panic. And so I kept feeling that. That is what didn't leave me, even though I left the Facebook group for a while. The constant pressure I was putting on myself to perform, right? In order to
Yeah.
look good and be liked by people, because I thought that's who I
Yeah.
was.
I do.
That
I've dealt with that too. I still deal with
yeah.
that, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
it's common. Like, we can get a
yeah,
whole bunch of amens, me too.
yeah. And then I started talking to ChatGPT about it. And that was my huge awakening was AI. Honestly, sounds crazy, but I started talking about it. I said, this is what happened to me at a place called Landmark. And AI is quite amazing. It pulls from all data sources, thousands and thousands of books and publications, and it knows. And it was like, oh, yes, Landmark. Let me tell you about what you experienced. I started just literally typing to it, I mean, for hours about what happened. And it was able to bring textbook terms to what happened to me. I kind of laughed at one point because I realized everything that happened to me was textbook. It was all classic high control group. And it said this to me. It's like, this is classic high control group behavior. They did this. This is called, emotional this and a da 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 that. And I was like, I even said to it, I'm like, this is so funny because in a way, nothing that happened to me was special, but it was my entire life. It was my entire life at the time,
Yeah.
right? So I don't know, like I was like, holy God, this is what happened. I was abused and I was in a high control group and I was manipulated and I was, I one thing that it said to me that was really eye-opening and it's stuck with me is that Landmark, what do? They took they basically sold me my own sold me my own identity. And they basically took my identity and sold it to me and then had me credit them for it. So like all the breakthroughs I had on the Landmark forum when I was 13, it wasn't just that like, oh no, that was already within you. And you said this, it was helpful back then. You said like, no, you were always that way, right? Landmark was just the place you discovered of who you really were. It was already inside you. But like Landmark took that was what was already inside me,
Mhm.
repackaged it, and sold it to me as if they had given it to me, and then I needed to
Called
then
weaponized empathy.
weapon. Yes, yes,
When Chris Shelton said that word to me, I literally was like stunned. I'm like,
yeah,
what? And then he explained it. And then now I've been reading up on it. It's got a couple of different ways that people use that term. And
yeah,
I've been reading John Atack's book, Opening Our Minds, which has like been blowing my mind. I just finished it this weekend because I just have to read it in pieces. I'm like, huh? I mean, that's still happening to me. It's
yeah,
funny you describe that because my girlfriend and I, we were trying to help these, Werner ex-staffers, the whole group of them, and they're telling us about their experiences, and we're like on the Googles. We didn't know about chat yet,
yeah,
so
yeah,
we're on the Googles. It's like 2022 or whatever, and we're going, okay, well that business practice and blah 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 blah. And I'll never forget this one day when we ran into this like flyer in the is in the UK. It was from the UK, and it was a flyer outlining what constitutes domestic slavery.
mm,
And it was they had just passed some new laws around that. And so it was kind of like this informational flyer for, what I think over here we would call employment abuse,
mm.
but it goes through domestic slavery. And we're reading through the things and we go, wait, what these guys are telling us over here constitutes that. Now, we hadn't quite made the link yet to the assisting program and the
Yeah,
overuse of the assisting program, but we got there eventually. But that feeling, I know that feeling when
yes,
you're talking and
yeah,
and you're like talking to somebody, or I had that a lot talking with a reporter because I had
yeah,
several reporters calling me during all this too, and which is why I was like, part of why I wrote my book, because I'm like, folks, this stuff's coming out. These are my friends. These are
yeah,
my family. I want to warn them about what's coming. That was actually my original motivation for writing the book, because I want somebody who I want to be on the mat ready to speak, because I knew that I could count on myself to also talk about the good side.
mhm,
And so I'm like, so I elected myself in that way, but also because I had all this knowledge. But I would talk to the reporter and he would ask me, like one time I was explaining the difference between being an employee and being a staff member.
yeah,
And I'm going through it. I'm like explaining, I'm like, well, you don't understand, as a staff member, you're constituted as the enterprise. You give your word to the fulfillment of the enterprise expressed in the world and la, la, la. And I'm like saying all this stuff. And I hadn't been on staff at that point for 10 years,
yeah,
but it's just coming out of me, like no big deal.
yeah,
And then I said, but an employee is somebody who works for the enterprise. They are not the enterprise, blah, blah, blah. And he was so great. He's like listening. And I go, and literally at one point I go, that's really but weird, isn't it? He goes, kind of.
yeah,
Yeah. He
yeah,
goes, that's not really a thing. Like that's not a thing.
no,
And later when a whole bunch of people were like pulling like out looking for lawsuits, and we found, I think in the neighborhood of 20 employment lawsuits, and they all say the same stuff over
yeah,
and over and over and over and over. But it's like each thing you find out, I don't know about you, but I still find it a little bit shocking. Less and less every few months, but it's still kind of shocking and sometimes upsetting
It's
because
upsetting. Yeah.
yeah.
For me, it's
Not
upsetting. Yeah.
yeah.
More just
Why do
like
you think it's upsetting?
I
What do you find
because
upsetting
you
about it?
know, I'm grieving something that I thought was my
Mm,
gonna be my entire life, you know? Like,
yeah.
I really believed that I would be a lifer or somebody who, I as recently as a year or 2 ago, would go up to the microphone still and share that my plant business was a result of having
Oh,
done the advanced course when I was 15. The forum leaders would tell me to share that. Like, "You wouldn't have this if it wasn't for this," and I literally believed it a year before your book, I
that's
believed.
really important what you just said, because that's another really sneaky, quiet way that you get sort of indoctrinated. And that's why you hear me say all the time, no, it was you. It was you. It wasn't them. It
Yeah,
wasn't them. And I did
that's
that
true.
as a wisdom course leader. Like when
Yeah.
people would, I mean, even when I was working in the enterprise, people would come to the mic and say, and I'm like, no, 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 it was your participation, because that was the ground of the wisdom area, was that the source of well-being was participation, not the thing you're participating with, but
Mm,
participation
mhm.
itself is what gives greater well-being in life. So it wasn't because I understood that it was manipulative or high control, but that is something, for those of you out there listening, it's hard to explain, but you are explicitly told and asked everything good that happens in your life. When
Everything.
we did, when Katrina, we one of our hotels became dubbed Hotel Katrina by local media because my husband happened to be managing it at the time. We were
Mm,
between managers, and we had a hotel full of evacuees, and we when they started coming to us when the levees broke and said we don't have anywhere to go, my husband, God bless him to this day, said stay. And then I kind of walked off my staff job and went down there. 5.5 weeks, we basically ran a relief and relocation effort out of our hotel. Midway through, I was like, one, I was in the middle of a massive emergency for weeks. I mean, you're just like, what's going on with your adrenals? And it's just crazy. I know, I understand it now, but I didn't then. But it was heartbreaking, but it was also miraculous. And I remember saying to somebody, this is an amazing story. It was before it got picked up by WFAA News and stuff. I'm like, what's happening here is miraculous. Like, the world needs to know what happens when a community comes together to take care of others and take care of each other. Like, it was just, to this day, it's still one of the most impactful experiences of my entire life.
yeah,
And of course, I don't know anybody but Landmark people. And
yeah.
somebody says, they hook me up with a friend of theirs. It's a PR person. And call this person and I say, okay, this is what's happening. And they said, oh, well, honestly, who should use this story is Landmark.
Right.
And so I end up I'm like, oh, but of course, this whole thing, and yeah, did I gain skills out of my being first a volunteer and then a employee of Landmark? Of course I did. And of course I put those skills to work. And I would never even try to deny that. But to say that that whole result was a function of Landmark in the world is a gross
Yeah.
overstatement. We got coached by Mick, who's now the CEO. Good guy, actually, still like him. But, how to talk about it. And they used the story. And, of course, I was all on board for that. And up until, I mean, fairly recently, as far as I know, they showed the videos, actually, the news videos and stuff in the self expression and leadership program. I asked them when they threatened to sue me back in 2020. That was one of my little petty get back things. I'm like, and by the way, you no longer have my permission to use my story. Not that I even have any domain over that. It's in the public domain there. Anybody can use it. So, but you really do that, I think, speaks to that kind of indoctrination, I
Yeah.
guess, like,
Yeah.
so that you actually believe everything that you do that is good is
Yep.
a function of them.
Yeah.
And everything you do that is bad is still something you've got to transform in yourself.
Yeah. Yep,
And
and we
I
also had,
mean,
like, they would talk about great graduates, right? Like, they had a distinct like, "You're a great graduate," and I feel like because I had made a lot of money and success in my business, like, I was then considered a really great graduate who had a really good share. So, a lot of it I did have the thought in the back of my mind, I'm like, "I don't really see the connection, right, between me creating a business and doing a course when I was 15." But I wanted to be liked by the leaders and by the people so badly
mm,
that I was willing to go up there and kind of say whatever, right? And I was trained when I worked there that, you're your memory isn't the best test for reality, they would say, right? Like, that's not a really valid test. So they basically said you could lie about your story. Any share could become a great share if because you don't really remember it accurately anyways. That's what I learned like early on,
I've had several forum leaders now tell me that their
right?
shares are made up
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
at least expanded on or whatever. But
Yeah. So,
yet, how is that not manipulation?
right.
As we're understanding more and more, that's the other thing I think that they're really not recognizing is that the world is waking up to these kind of exploitive
Yeah.
and manipulative tactics.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't work anymore. I mean, their business is really struggling. And if they're listening, we're giving them a lot of clues as to why.
Yeah.
So
Hello.
yeah, but yeah, that's interesting. And I think
Yeah.
the thing you're speaking to too about that's a feature in LGATs. So large group awareness trainings. A lot of people focus on the large group part. There are lots of groups that meet in groups that are very healthy. I'm a part of a great group, the Ridwan School, Diamond Approach. I love it. It's very healthy. There's lots of groups. Group is not unhealthy in
Yeah.
and of itself. That's not the thing.
Yeah.
It's how that group is used, how that group is, and how that leader is interacting with the group and using it. And you just described one way really well, which is the social prize in that environment is to expose something really big, transform it,
Uh-huh.
and have a miraculous result. So just like torture, like how we found out torture doesn't work because people will pretty much tell you anything to make it stop.
Uh,
But the same dynamic works in the reverse. People will tell almost anything to get the popularity, the fame, the appreciation, to be seen.
yeah.
Like there's all of these psychological like goodies
Yeah.
that we don't really understand. And there isn't anybody that wouldn't fall for it.
Yeah.
The more educated you are, that's one of the things people are like, oh, I'm educated for that. Da, da, da. I do critical thinking. That's not gonna save you.
Yeah.
In fact, if you think you couldn't fall for something like this, you're probably the only people more susceptible than you are ones that have fallen for it before and aren't confronting it.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm still here doing this show. When Tony and I actually sat down and talked and said, look, should we continue? And we said, well, yeah, there's a lot of people that they think just because they left the organization, which is another thing I think you just demonstrated really well. Like just leaving the organization, you don't leave the mental stuff. You're
No,
physically out, but you're mentally in.
that's
So
right.
now you're just recreating
Yes.
that for yourself. And I've seen it so much. I know many, many people. It's part of what had me start questioning the work itself is I know a lot of people that were in programs with me 20 years ago, and their life is in the same spot.
Yeah.
And then I started to meet people who'd never done this kind of work, and their lives are like really great.
Yeah.
And they don't have some of the problems and stress. So it's had me go, well,
Yeah.
does it really work?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And trauma is real. Like if there's one thing I wanted to be set out there is that I'm learning that and I'm accepting it. I
Mhm.
wouldn't have accepted it working there, that trauma is real. It lives in the body and it's not a choice. Like I didn't choose the trauma, right? Like it's in my
Mm.
body and, but there is a way out. Like there is relief from it in talking about it and distinguishing it and bringing new distinction, right, to things because landmark's all about distinctions.
Go look up the word distinction. That was another big funny moment when my friend and I like figured out that distinction doesn't actually, when you start figuring out the words, how they're used there don't actually mean
Yeah.
what they mean.
Right, like, I had to create a new definition of integrity for myself, like, when I learned what actual integrity was, not, morality, even though they say it's not morality, but it is, right? Like, it's crazy. So, but in that, like in relearning healthy ways of, there are helpful things, right? Like we said this at the very beginning, there are helpful things that Landmark, I don't even care about Landmark, but that program brings, certain conversations, but, learning the healthy versions of those things. And, I don't know, and obviously there's still so much more work for me to do. And I think knowing that helps, like me knowing that it's not going to be over anytime soon also brings me a lot of relief because I'm also giving myself compassion to just like cry or be frozen or not be perfect. Or last Saturday, I didn't want to go live and sell plants. For the very first time, was like, you know what? I don't have to. Like, I am not, the whole world's not going to come crashing down if I don't sell plants tonight. So giving myself that love and acceptance to be human, which is what Landmark also lacks, right? There's no allowing you to just be a normal human being from time to time. And so now I've got to give that to myself. Right. And
Oh, that's
That's the
beautiful.
beauty.
I have a version of that too. I have a little women's group, and we if you're a member, you get an email with a practice each week of something you can do to take care of yourself. And
Yeah.
we got in the habit of putting them out on Mondays. That's like internally, that was the structure that Susan and I, my assistant who helps me with that,
Yeah.
created. And then we had this one day, like she was sick. I was like, all this stuff was happening, and we were just going crazy, like trying to get. And she was a longtime Landmark graduate. She was a course supervisor, and blah blah blah. And we literally had this moment where we realized we were the ones who said Monday.
Yes.
Like it was okay if it went on Tuesday. Like nobody would
Yeah.
even notice if it went on Tuesday or even Wednesday, or honestly, in some cases, if it didn't go at all.
Yeah.
And it was this huge triumph.
Yeah.
So I love that you're describing that, because that's a lot of what, not just healing, but you can't heal if you don't deconstruct.
Yeah.
So that's another thing that I would want to add in your demo, by getting in that conversation first with the Facebook group, taking that step back, which was really healthy and so great for you. Everybody should do what they got to do for them. They're never going to hear anything bad for me. But then, engaging, you happen to engage with Chat GPT. We have the Rachel Bernstein, the learning and healing group that I'm hosting with her has just been amazing. We don't even talk about landmarks. A lot of the times we're just talking about like, well, wait, what are boundaries? Because that's something that does not exist in an organization like that. In fact, the pride is on not in like
Yep.
pushing past boundaries.
Yeah. Being unreasonable.
Yeah. Well, anyway, there's some stuff coming out that you'll learn about the gestation, like the birth, and how that all came to be. And a lot of staff practices will make sense to you in a very different way. But yeah, you have to deconstruct it. You have to go, but wait a minute, you have to question it. That's fundamentally what deconstruction is.
Yeah.
You go, well, but wait, what is a distinction? Is that really it? Oh, wait, distinction means a comparison between this and that. It doesn't mean it's not a noun. That was our big thing. We're like, it's not a noun.
Mm.
We're just, oh, wait, that's what, and we have to be willing. And I think this is so important, not just for this subject, but in our world today, we have to be willing. There's so much misinformation. We have to be willing to question and really dig to find facts,
Mm-hmm.
things that are objective facts. That is still a thing. But most of all, we have to be willing to question our own beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not easy.
No, I didn't want to.
Not
That's why I
easy.
left the group for a while, because I didn't want to. I was tired of
Yeah.
I'm over this whole thing. But
It was painful. Yeah.
but it
That's right.
lives and it still lived in my body, and I knew that wasn't, I think I was not willing to admit yet that it was stemmed from working there, right? Because it'd been so long
Mm,
ago. I mean, even my weight, right? Like I've been having insights into my own weight because I was never overweight prior to working at Landmark, and I gained 80 pounds, right? And, and I haven't been able to get rid of it, but I realized like that was my body's way of protecting itself when it felt so unsafe, right? And I didn't ever
right.
have that insight until a couple weeks ago. And now I'm like, oh my God, like, like I can return myself to that vulnerable 18-year-old kid who wanted to make a difference. I still want to, whatever that looks like, make a difference. But, it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to look a certain way. It doesn't have to be for a big organization, right? It can just be, in my day-to-day living, the way I am with someone at the grocery store or whatever it looks like for me, right? So
Right.
like returning myself to who I was prior to really working there. Of course, I did the form when I was 13, but like working there was where I think I lost my identity and created a new one that worked really well in that environment. But it
Yeah.
doesn't work well now for me.
Well, you hadn't at 13, you would not have even fully created an
Right.
identity. I mean, even by the landmark things, which are riffed out of psychology, sorry to say, folks, but the whole winning formula, right? You don't even which is that's their version
Yeah.
of identity. So that third leg
Yeah.
of it isn't even created until your teen years. So it's not even, I mean, I started there, I was 20, I forget, I was probably 27 or something. And, worked there until 2020. So what would I have been? I'm 56 now, so 51. So, 25 years of the good portion of my adult life. And I'm still finding ways that like, oh, wait, maybe I think that way because this is where I got trained in thinking that way. And now it's time to question it. and say, does that still serve me?
Yeah.
And if it serves me, you know what? I'll keep it. I
Yeah.
don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
I'll keep it if it serves
then
me.
then you're really at the source of it, right? Like for
Mhm.
yourself. And it's not because of Landmark, right? That constant just freaking giving them credit for everything, is where you're not even sure if it works for you, but
Wow.
I like that. I like what you just said.
Yeah. Well, Brandon, thank you so much for sharing this section. And, I look forward to hearing as your journey continues, as you
Yeah.
unwind and deconstruct. And most of all, anything else you want to share with our audience about who you are now. I love the way you came out.
Yes.
Oh, this is another piece I just wanted to really appreciate you for. And this is not love bombing. I actually had a whole great conversation with Rachel Bernstein because I was like, all of a sudden I'm afraid to appreciate people because what if they think I'm love bombing them? And she said, if it's real, it's not love. And you're not asking for something in return. It's real. It's
Right.
okay to
There you go.
appreciate
Yeah.
people. But I loved, it's very scary for former staff and program leaders to talk about how it really is, because you do carry on your shoulders, what if I ruin people's transformation? This for me was a big thing, was like, oh my gosh. But also you're kind of told in there, like, no, 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 you don't show how the sausage is made because some people can't be with it. They're not
Yeah.
as elevated as you
Well,
are, whatever BS.
or like the guilt trip, like you don't want to take the whole enterprise down, do you? Do you want to you will be the sole reason that that the work won't be able to be done in the world, right? Like that, putting it on you. Yeah.
Right, right, right. Yeah, no, exactly. That's where I was.
Yes.
I opened my book with, I'm walking the neighborhood for about 6 months, crying and talking to friends and like, oh my God, like I'm learning all this information. And I know that it's going to come out because there were legal cases, there were reporters calling. So I know that it's going to become public. I thought it was going to become public in 2022 and then 23 and then, but I knew that. And I'm like, all these people I knew are going to like erase
Uh-huh.
what they got.
Yeah.
Now I'm a little bit like, well, that's okay, actually, because it's still in them. It was there before, it will be there after. There's lots and lots and lots of stuff out there in the world that can help us as human beings evolve and take care of ourselves and
Yes.
increase our awareness and consciousness, and that are not done through abusive tactics or
Yeah.
manipulative tactics.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I've dedicated the rest of my career to, is finding that stuff and pointing out that, and getting clear about what makes something healthy versus unhealthy. So
Yeah.
that's really great. Well, I'm so happy for you. I'm happy that, you're doing really well in your plant business. I was very worried about you when all the Tic Tac drama was going on.
I know. So much drama in the world, huh? But
I know.
used to
I
it.
know. Yeah, you are. That's right.
Drama, huh? No, it's
That's right.
that's
Exactly.
so who I am now is someone who is just an authentic expression of myself, and I do what I want when I want, and I don't do what I want when I don't do. I just give myself permission to be, and be
Mm,
human, and that is enough, and that is me.
mm,
So I love myself, and I love who I am for people. Like I just love that about like when people tell me I get more like you made a difference for me now that I'm not searching for it or trying to make it happen, right? Like just
no,
being.
not
Like I
right.
don't know how to explain just being, but like
Yeah,
being myself, who I was born to be. It's in my soul, it's in my gut, and I tuning into that has been the most healthy thing. So that's who I am now.
that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I can hear that it's yours. You're
Yeah.
not having to assign
Right.
credit
Right.
to something
No.
outside of you. You've moved your locus of control from outside to
Yeah,
inside. So
and no
that's
one can
so
ever take it
powerful.
from me. Like once it's yours, it's never gonna be taken from me again. And no one, yeah, I can only give it to myself. So, which is really powerful. It's kind of fun. Like it's so like cool in a way. And like I'm discovering the coolness of that, and I don't know. So
Fabulous. Well, Brandon, thank you so much. And we'll wrap it up here until we meet again.
yes.
Thank you.